Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are tracking the most consequential military developments on the planet in real time. And what we are about to walk through today is one of the most significant escalatory moments between the United States and Russia since this war began. You do not want to miss what comes next. Here is what I am going to show you. First, we are going to break down exactly what the United States hit, how it hit it, and why this particular target mattered far more than any headline has told you. We are going to look at the specific weapon systems deployed, including a platform that has not been used in this theater before, and explain why its appearance here changes the calculus for every Russian commander operating within 300 kilometers of the Ukrainian front. Then we are going to examine Russia's response, which on the surface looked like fury, but underneath revealed strategic paralysis of a kind we have not seen from Moscow since the early weeks of this war. We are going to trace the second-order effects already rippling through alliance structures, from NATO's eastern flank to Beijing's quiet recalculations. And by the end, you will understand why this single strike may have done more to reshape the trajectory of the war than the last 6 months of grinding attrition combined. To understand why this strike matters, you need to understand what Russia has been building along Ukraine's southern axis over the past year and a half, because it is not what most people think. The mainstream narrative has focused on the grinding positional warfare in the Donbass, the slow-motion siege of fortified Ukrainian positions along the eastern front. And that narrative is not wrong. But it is incomplete. While the world's attention was locked on Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar, Russia was quietly constructing a logistics and command architecture in occupied southern Ukraine designed to serve a very specific strategic purpose: the eventual push towards Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine's fourth-largest city and home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant. This was not a secret. Western intelligence agencies had been tracking the buildup for months. Satellite imagery analyzed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies showed a systematic pattern of base construction, supply depot hardening, and air defense layering that bore all the hallmarks of offensive preparation. The base in question, located approximately 45 kilometers behind the current line of contact, in a position I am not going to specify with more precision for reasons that will become obvious, served as the linchpin of this entire architecture. It functioned simultaneously as a command node for Southern Front operations, a logistics hub channeling ammunition, fuel, and replacement equipment from Crimea through the land bridge, and a protected staging area for rotational forces cycling through frontline positions. The Russian military had invested heavily in defending this position. At least 2 S-400 Triumph long-range air defense battalions were positioned to provide overlapping coverage, complemented by shorter-range Pantsir S-1 point defense systems and electronic warfare complexes designed to disrupt GPS-guided munitions and drone operations. In Moscow's estimation, this base was untouchable. The layered air defense network was supposed to make any strike prohibitively costly. That assessment turned out to be catastrophically wrong. Now let us talk about the actors involved, because the dynamics here are more complex than a simple bilateral exchange. On one side, you have a Russian military that has been operating under enormous strain. Manpower shortages have forced Moscow to rely increasingly on poorly trained, mobilized troops, North Korean supplemental forces whose combat effectiveness remains questionable, and Wagner's successor units with fractured command loyalty. Despite these constraints, Russia's strategic intent in the south has remained consistent: establish conditions for a major offensive that would present Ukraine with an impossible dilemma, defending the south while already overextended in the east. On the other side, you have the United States operating under authorities that have evolved significantly since early 2025. The current administration has adopted what defense officials have described to reporters at Defense One as a posture of calibrated escalation, meaning Washington reserves the right to strike targets directly threatening Ukrainian sovereignty when those targets meet specific classified criteria. This policy represents a meaningful departure from earlier restrictions, and while the legal framework remains contested in some quarters, the operational reality is now undeniable. And then there is Ukraine itself, which played a role in this strike that has received almost no attention but proves absolutely critical to understanding what happened. Ukrainian intelligence, specifically the GUR Military Intelligence Directorate, provided the targeting package that made precision engagement possible. This was not a case of the United States acting unilaterally. This was a deeply integrated intelligence operation that reflects a level of U.S.-Ukrainian operational fusion that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. The base's precise coordinates, internal layout, defensive positions, shift rotation patterns, and critically, the timing window, when the S-400 radar coverage exhibited a known gap during system cycling, were all products of Ukrainian intelligence collection. One more piece of baseline context before we get into the strike itself. The weapons used in this operation had to overcome what military planners call an anti-access area denial bubble, commonly shortened to A2AD. Russia's integrated air defense network in occupied southern Ukraine is among the most dense on the planet. It was explicitly designed to prevent exactly the kind of strike that just happened. Understanding that this bubble was not just penetrated, but effectively neutralized in the opening minutes of the operation, tells you something profound about how the balance of technology in this war has shifted. Now let me show you exactly what happened. The strike package was built around the AGM-158B JASSM-ER, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile Extended Range. This is a stealthy, precision-guided cruise missile with a range exceeding 570 miles, manufactured by Lockheed Martin. It carries a 2,000-pound class-penetrating warhead designed to defeat hardened structures, and its low observable radar cross-section makes it extraordinarily difficult to detect and intercept, even for advanced systems like the S-400. The JASSM-ER has been in the U.S. inventory for years but had not, until now, been confirmed as operationally deployed against Russian positions in Ukraine. Its appearance here is not incremental. It is a threshold event. The missiles were launched from B-1B Lancer strategic bombers, operating from a standoff distance well outside Russian air defense engagement envelopes. Reports corroborated by flight tracking data, analyzed by open-source intelligence accounts, and subsequently confirmed in a background briefing reported by Reuters, indicate that at least 2 B-1Bs participated, each carrying up to 24 JASSM-ERs in internal rotary launchers. The total salvo is assessed at between 30 and 40 missiles, though the exact number remains classified. Here is where the tactical picture becomes devastating. The strike was sequenced in 3 distinct waves separated by approximately 8 to 12 minutes each. The first wave targeted the S-400 battery positions and their associated radar systems. This is the critical piece. By striking the air defense layer first with missiles specifically routed to exploit the radar cycling gap identified by Ukrainian intelligence, the initial wave effectively blinded the base's protective umbrella before the second and third waves arrived. It was surgical. The second wave struck the command and communications infrastructure, the hardened bunkers housing operational staff, and the fiber-optic relay nodes connecting this base to the broader Russian command network. The third wave hit the logistics facilities, the ammunition storage, the fuel depots, and the vehicle staging areas. The result was comprehensive destruction on a scale that satellite imagery, published within 48 hours by both Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs, made impossible to deny. Crater analysis conducted by analysts at the Middlebury Institute's James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies identified at least 26 distinct impact points consistent with JASSM-ER warhead detonation signatures. Secondary explosion patterns visible in thermal imaging suggest that ammunition stores cooked off for hours after the initial strikes, compounding the destruction far beyond what the missiles alone inflicted. Now step back and think about what this means tactically. Russia just lost not merely a base but a node. The Southern Front logistics architecture that Moscow spent 18 months building was designed with this facility as its central hub. Ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and personnel replacements flowing from Crimea through the land bridge were staged here before distribution to forward positions. With this hub destroyed, every unit operating within a 100-kilometer radius faces immediate supply disruption. Frontline formations that were already operating on thin margins now face the prospect of ammunition rationing and delayed casualty evacuation. The tactical effect is not just the loss of the base. It is the cascading degradation of combat capability across the entire southern sector. But the strategic implications run deeper still. Remember what this base was for. It was the staging architecture for a planned Zaporizhzhia offensive. That offensive is now, in the assessment of multiple Western military analysts quoted by the Financial Times, effectively dead for a minimum of 6 to 9 months. Russia cannot reconstitute this kind of infrastructure quickly. The engineering work alone took over a year. The S-400 batteries destroyed here represent assets that Russia cannot easily replace, because its defense industrial base is already straining to meet demands across multiple axes, from the Donbass front to air defense of the Russian homeland against Ukrainian long-range drone strikes. This brings us to what happened next, and this is where the story moves from significant to genuinely extraordinary. Russia's immediate response followed a predictable pattern. Within hours, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement claiming that the strike had been intercepted and that damage was minimal. This is standard Russian information warfare procedure, and no serious analyst gave it credibility, particularly after the satellite imagery became public. But then something unexpected happened. Within 36 hours of the strike, Russian forces along a 40-kilometer stretch of the southern front began what military analysts are describing as a tactical redeployment, which is a polite way of saying they pulled back, not a dramatic retreat, not a rout, but a measurable repositioning of forward units to secondary defensive lines further from the point of contact. This repositioning was first identified by the Deep State Mapping Project, which tracks frontline changes using a combination of geolocated footage, intercepted communications, and ground source reporting. It was subsequently confirmed by both British and Estonian military intelligence assessments shared with media. Think about what that means for a moment. A single coordinated strike, executed over the span of perhaps 90 minutes, generated a tactical withdrawal along 40 kilometers of front within a day and a half. That is not proportional. That is not a measured response to asset loss. That is an indicator that the strike shattered something less visible than bunkers and radar arrays. It shattered confidence. Russian field commanders in the south appear to have concluded, rationally, that if the United States can penetrate their most heavily defended rear area position with this level of precision, then no position behind the front line is safe. And if no position is safe, then the forward deployed units those positions support are operating without a reliable rear. The second-order effects are already materializing in ways that extend far beyond the Ukrainian theater. Within NATO, the strike has accelerated discussions that were already underway regarding the alliance's own deep strike doctrine. Poland's Deputy Minister of National Defense stated publicly, in remarks reported by the Polish press agency, that the operation demonstrates capabilities that should inform alliance planning on the eastern flank. The Baltic states have collectively requested a formal briefing from SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, on the implications for their own defense postures. This strike did not just damage a Russian base, it became a proof of concept that NATO planners are now incorporating into their own operational thinking. And then there is Beijing. China has said almost nothing publicly about this strike, which itself tells you something. Beijing's strategic calculus regarding Taiwan and the broader Indo-Pacific is deeply influenced by its assessment of American willingness and capability to project precision strike power against integrated air defense networks. What just happened in southern Ukraine is, from Beijing's perspective, a live-fire demonstration of exactly the kind of capability that would be relevant in a Taiwan contingency. The JASM-ER's ability to defeat layered air defense and destroy hardened targets at standoff range is directly applicable to the anti-access challenge posed by Chinese military positions. You can be certain that PLA analysts are studying the published satellite imagery and open-source strike assessments with intense interest. Russia's diplomatic response has been equally revealing. President Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov described the strike as a dangerous escalation that will not go unanswered. That language matters. In the grammar of Russian strategic communications, will not go unanswered is weaker than might be expected. Compare it to the explicit nuclear signaling Moscow employed in 2022 when it perceived existential threat. The absence of nuclear rhetoric in this case suggests that despite the severity of the blow, Moscow has internally assessed that escalation to that level would be counterproductive, likely because it understands that Washington calibrated this strike precisely to remain below the threshold that would justify such a response. Now, I want to be honest about the limitations of what we know, because intellectual honesty matters more than narrative neatness. There are aspects of this strike that remain genuinely unclear, and anyone who tells you they have the complete picture is overstating their knowledge. First, the casualty figures remain unconfirmed. The initial Ukrainian estimate of approximately 1,200 Russian personnel at the base has not been independently verified, and it is entirely possible that Russian forces received some warning and evacuated a portion of their personnel before impact. The fog of war is real, and inflated casualty claims serve the information warfare objectives of all parties. I am not going to give you a number I cannot substantiate. Second, there is legitimate debate about the escalatory risk of this operation. While I have described Russia's response as revealing strategic paralysis, an alternative reading is that Moscow is exercising deliberate restraint while preparing a more consequential asymmetric response, potentially targeting U.S. intelligence sharing infrastructure, expanding cyber operations against NATO members, or accelerating weapons transfers to actors hostile to American interests in other theaters. The fact that Russia has not yet responded dramatically does not mean it will not. Third, the long-term sustainability of this kind of operation is an open question. JASSM-ER missiles are expensive, roughly $1.3 million per unit, according to publicly available procurement data. A salvo of 30 to 40 missiles represents $40 to $50 million in ordnance, expended on a single target complex. The United States maintains a substantial inventory, but that inventory is not infinite, and the defense industrial base faces well-documented challenges in scaling production to wartime demand levels. Whether this strike represents a repeatable operational model or a one-time demonstration of capability is a question that matters enormously for the war's trajectory, and one that does not have a clear answer yet. Finally, there is the question of Chinese interpretation that I raised earlier. While I suggested that Beijing will read this as a demonstration relevant to Taiwan scenarios, it is equally possible that China draws a different lesson entirely, namely that the way to defeat American standoff precision strike is to invest even more aggressively in air defense density, electronic warfare, and dispersed basing. The strike may accelerate Chinese military modernization rather than deter aggression. Strategic signaling is an inherently uncertain business because you cannot control how your adversary interprets your message. Here is where we are. In the span of 72 hours, a single coordinated American strike accomplished what months of attritional warfare along the southern front had not. It destroyed the physical infrastructure underpinning Russia's offensive plans toward Zaporizhzhia. It triggered a tactical withdrawal along 40 kilometers of front. It demonstrated a capability that has reshaped how NATO, Russia, and China are all calculating their next moves. And it revealed, through Russia's response, that Moscow's strategic options are narrower than its rhetoric suggests. This was not just a strike on a base. It was a statement about the kind of war this has become. The era in which Russia could build rear-area infrastructure behind layered air defense and assume it was safe is over. The fusion of Ukrainian intelligence and American precision strike has created an operational model that can reach targets Moscow believed were beyond risk. That changes everything about how this war will be fought going forward. Russian logistics planners must now assume that any concentration of assets, any fixed position of value, is targetable. That assumption alone, even without another missile being fired, degrades Russian operational planning across the entire theater. What happens next will tell us whether this strike was an inflection point or an isolated event. Watch for three things. First, watch whether the United States conducts follow-on strikes against other Southern Front infrastructure nodes. If this was the first in a systematic campaign rather than a single demonstration, the military implications multiply dramatically. Second, watch Russia's asymmetric response. Moscow will not absorb this blow without attempting to impose costs somewhere, and the form that response takes will tell us how the Kremlin is recalculating. Third, watch the diplomatic channel. Historically, the most dramatic escalations in this war have been followed by quiet back-channel communications. Whether those channels are active right now is something we will likely learn in the coming weeks.